So, Glacial Chasm is a pretty interesting card. Glacial Chasm is a land with a cumulative upkeep of 2 life. When this land enters the battlefield, you must sacrifice a land. Your creatures cannot attack while you control this land. Wow, that's a lot of downsides. All damage dealt to you is reduced to 0. Okay, damn, that's pretty fucking good. Glacial Chasm is such an atypical card, and it's very interesting for it. Let's break this bad boy down. First, let's start with Cumulative Upkeep, a mechanic that doesn't see much usage these days because it's annoying to track and generally unpopular for not being fun to play with. And I'm pretty sure this is the first time I've ever talked about Cumulative Upkeep. Now that's mostly because I'm working on the Ice Age set review, but a longtime viewer asked if I could talk about Glacial Chasm, and it's such a cool card I was willing to acquiesce. But, Cumulative Upkeep. Cards with Cumulative Upkeep get an age counter put on them at the beginning of your upkeep, and then you pay the cumulative cost multiplied by the number of age counters on it. In the case of Glacial Chasm, the first upkeep you pay 2 life. Then the next upkeep you would pay 4 life, and then you would pay 6 life, and then you would probably die unless you had gained life, because it would be 8, and that equals whatever. If you're playing Commander, you'd probably get a couple more turns out of it. Cumulative Upkeep is a mechanic that I personally find interesting, but it's definitely a mechanic that gets burdensome. Ice Age uses this mechanic a lot, and I think this is a mechanic where a little goes a long way. Often the upkeep cost is mana, but I really appreciate Glacial Chasm for using life in the cumulative cost. That's tough to say. This card also has a list of downsides. While it's active, you can't attack, and attacking is a pretty common win condition, if you weren't aware. You also go down 2 lands to play this card because it doesn't tap for mana in most circumstances, and you have to sack a land to play it. That puts you down 2 mana compared to your opponent, assuming nobody missed a land drop. All of these downsides, or things that you have to do to gain access to this effect, is a pretty tall ask. And on top of that, Glacial Chasm doesn't give you much breathing room, as it'll chunk your life pretty quickly. But taking 0 damage is kind of insane. This card can buy you 2 or 3 turns easily, and that's often more than enough to either block your opponent out or to build whatever win condition you were going to build to, win the game. What's especially interesting about Glacial Chasm is that there are many different ways to approach the problems it creates. You can be really funny and respond to lethal attack by using crop rotation and then just let it die during your upkeep if you just need 1 turn to clap back and get the win. Or you can also combine it with shit like Crucible of Worlds and Azusa Lost But Seeking, which is really fucking funny. Throw in a strip mine and you've built a machine that turns your friends into enemies, which is pretty fucking cool. You can also play it fairly and have a pretty good time with it, if you want. You could also find a way to gain more life than you'll lose, but that's probably the worst way to go about trying to break this ice hole. Be careful though. Glacial Chasm does nothing against the ever-present and all-powerful Millstone. Being serious for a moment, this card is really strong, and sees at least niche play in pretty much every format it's allowed. Some vintage land combo strategies play it, but those are usually pretty niche. Canland and EDH also love this card to some degree. Legacy land decks play it on occasion, and it's also being explored in pre-modern as far as I understand it. It's definitely less useful in stuff like old school, because the format doesn't really have the tools to break it as much and use it as a lock piece, but it still has some value there in my opinion. If the format allows Ice Age, that is. A good chunk of old school is 93-94, and Ice Age isn't legal in those variants. It is pretty hard to be useful in a format that doesn't allow you to be played. Generally, Glacial Chasm is usually used as an oh shit button rather than a consistent part of your strategy. And the main reason for that is you can't really control what your opponent's win condition is. I mean, yeah, dealing damage is definitely a pretty common way to win, and in some formats it might even be the only win condition. But this is a hard card to set up, and an even harder card to keep up for long periods of time. It is really good against a deck that's trying to burn you out hard in one turn with like a Fireball or a Drain Life, and it's really good against an aggro deck trying to pressure you out by turn 4 or 5. But something like this does almost nothing against a stack trying to lock you out and nickel and dime your life total. It also doesn't do anything against mill or other alternative win condition strategies. Except for poison/infect. It works against those because those abilities require the damage to be registered to replace the damage with poison counters. Thank God it's a nerf to infect. Glacial Chasm is a really cool card. It's pretty niche, and while you can lock someone out with it, there are easier ways to do that. It's legal in pretty much every format that it could be legal in, and that's because it's kind of a hassle to make work, and it's not super consistent. If you lock someone down with this, it's powerful, but so many things have to go right. In my experience, it's better used more as a delay tactic while you set up your win condition, rather than a straight lock piece, and I think that's helped this card stay at least somewhat under the radar. Also, this is a land. I don't know if I've given that particular fact enough spotlight, but that's really interesting. By today's standards, that might seem brutal, but it actually made this card far easier to answer back in the day. When this card came out, the ways to deal with lands included Strip Mine, Sinkhole, Stone Rain, Ice Storm, Kudzu, Armageddon, Fissure, Thermal Karst, Icequake, and probably more that I'm forgetting. Yokoschleip. There was also a lot of artifact destruction, but had this been an enchantment, really the only ways to deal with it would have been like Tranquility or Disenchant. And I guess Neverall's Disc and Chaos Orb if you're lucky. This was far from the first land that did something other than tap for mana, but it is a really interesting approach to that design space. And I could argue with myself until the cows came home about whether you're supposed to do something like this or if it's good for the game, but I don't really think Glacial Chasm was ever horrible for the game. It's definitely powerful, but it's such a weird expression of power that I personally really appreciate this card. I think that's all I have to say on Glacial Chasm though, so let's talk about the art. There are two versions to talk about. The original illustration for this ice hole was done by Liz Danforth, an artist that started in Legends. I like Liz's work, and this is no exception. The amount of detail that was put into what is essentially a gaping gash in frozen water is pretty impressive. The details are fantastic, and while this art is unlikely to invoke imagination or bring the same level of joy that some other pieces might, it's still fantastically well done. It feels cold, which is what it's supposed to do. I think this art is pretty awesome, personally. It is just a fucking hole in the ground though, so I don't know what else to say about it. Let's move on to the last art. Glacial Chasm was reprinted in From the Vault Realms, and this art is super well executed. This was illustrated by Mike Bierk, and the sheer amount of color and detail put into something that's just an ice gash is honestly kind of phenomenal. This is such an insane execution of Glacial Chasm. The glowing blue of the ice-absorbing light is such an insane detail. The pitch black darkness of the void swallowing all light next to that is also fucking great. Even the dirt and rocks add to the overall composition here in ways that make it really fun to look at for me. The mountains and the sky in the background also have a surprising amount of detail and presence. This is one well-drawn ice hole, in my opinion. But yeah, I think that's all I have to say about this card. It's super fucking interesting, and its design approaches the game in such a strange way. It's wild to think about how early into the game's development a design like this appeared. It's a cool and fun card in my opinion, but as always, I'm excited to hear your opinions in the comments. What do you think of Ice Hole? Or Glacial Chasm, I mean. Okay, yeah, I think that's all I got in the tank. You can like the video if you liked it, I would appreciate that. You can, of course, subscribe if you give a shit, but either way, I hope you have a magical day. Thank you for watching.